We are factoring trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. In other words, you've got an x squared term that has a coefficient, a number other than just 1 in front of it. And in the last section, we saw one way of doing this. In this section, I'm going to show you an alternative method so you can pick the method that you think is easier to use. I think the one that we saw in section 6.3 is quicker and easier if you see how to do it. But if you don't see how to do it, it can take a lot of trial and error and trying different things. And this way is more systematic. So you can decide which one you like better. So the way this method works, and this is called, sometimes it's called the AC method because it starts by looking at A times C. Sometimes it's called using the grouping method because that's involved. But here's how it works. You would always start by seeing if there's a common factor that you can factor out before you do anything else. But assuming you've done that or there is no common factor to get out of the way, start by multiplying together these two numbers, the A and the C. And then find two numbers that multiply to that number and that add up to B, the number in the middle, the coefficient on the X term in the middle. And use those two numbers that you found to break up that middle term into two separate terms that add together to combine to give you BX. And then once you have it written out like that, like AX squared plus something X plus another something X plus C, where the two somethings add up to the BX that you started with, now factor this using the grouping method that we talked about in section 6.1. So to be able to do this, you do have to know how to be doing the factoring by grouping. So if you're not sure how that works, you have to go back and look at section 6.1 where we explained that. But assuming you know how to do that, once you get to this point, it's just using grouping to take it from there. So one example that we already did the other way in that other video, 5x squared plus 8x plus 3. If we were doing it by the grouping AC method that I'm talking about here, you would start by multiplying together these two numbers. The 5 times the 3 is 15. And then you'd look for two numbers that multiply to 15 and add up to 8. So numbers that multiply to 15 but add to 8. 5 and 3 works. So use those two numbers to break up this middle term 8x into 5x plus 3x. So it's equivalent to what we started with, only now it's 5x squared plus 5x plus 3x plus 3. And now we're going to factor that by grouping. The first two terms, we can pull out what they have in common, which is 5x. So when we do that, it's 5x times x plus 1. And then for the last two terms, what those have in common is a 3. So if we pull out a 3, it's 3 times x plus 1. And now both of these have an x plus 1 in common. So when we pull that out, we got 5x plus 3 times x plus 1. And there's our final answer. There it's factored. You can check by foiling if you want. 5x squared plus 5x plus 3x. So there's your 8x plus 3. Another example that we've already done the other way, but here's how it works using this method. 5y squared minus 17, or 7y squared, minus 17y plus 10. The a times the c, 7 times 10, would be 70. So we need to come up with numbers that multiply to 70 and add up to negative 17. And the numbers that work would be a negative 7 and a negative 10. Negative 7 times negative 10 would be positive 70. Negative 7 plus negative 10 would be negative 17. So use those two numbers to break up the term in the middle into, so now you have 7y squared minus 7y minus 10y plus 10. And now factor by grouping. Pull out the 7y from the first two terms, pull out the minus 10 from the last two. So it's 7y times y minus 1, minus 10 times y minus 1, and they both have a y minus 1 in common, so you can pull out the 7y minus 10 times y minus 1. Now let's try some examples that we don't know ahead of time what they're going to do, because we haven't done them yet. 8x squared minus 6x minus 5. Let's factor that. So to start with, a times c, the first number times the last number, 8 times negative 5 would be negative 40. So now we need to find two numbers that multiply to that negative 40 and that add up to negative 6. So numbers that multiply to negative 40, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Could be an 8 and a 5, could be a 10 and a 4, could be a 20 and a 2, or a 40 and a 1. But they have to add up to negative 6. To add up to a negative, the bigger absolute value has to be negative. You have to have more pull downward than upward, in the negative direction than in the positive direction. And what turns out to work would be a negative 10 and a positive 4. Negative 10 times positive 4 is negative 40. Negative 10 plus positive 4 gives you negative 6. So those are the two numbers we were looking for. Now, we're not done yet. We got a ways to go yet, but that tells us where to go from here. We're going to use these two numbers to break up the middle term, replace the minus 6x with a minus 10x plus 4x. So it looks like this. 8x squared minus 10x plus 4x minus 5. And now we're going to factor that by grouping. So from the first two terms, what can we pull out? What they have in common, their greatest common factor would be a 2x. And then we need 2x times 4x to get 8x squared. We need 2x times a minus 5 to get the minus 10x. So 2x times 4x minus 5. And then from these last two terms, the 4x minus 5, they don't really have anything in common except just 1, but we'll write it that way, plus 1 times 4x minus 5. And so do you see where we go from here? 2x plus 1 all times the 4x minus 5 that they have in common. Oops, that was supposed to be a minus. So there's our answer, 2x plus 1 times 4x minus 5. If you check that with the FOIL method, first we have 2x times 4x is 8x squared. Outside we have 2x times minus 5 is minus 10x. Inside we have plus 1 times 4x, so plus 4x. And last we have plus 1 times minus 5, so minus 5. And when you combine those middle two terms, you do get back to 8x squared minus 6x minus 5. How about this one? 2x squared minus 3x minus 14. A times c would be 2 times negative 14, and that would be negative 28. So we need to find numbers that multiply to negative 28 and add to negative 3. So think about all the ways you can multiply two numbers together and get negative 28. And out of all those possibilities, what's the one where those two numbers add up to negative 3? That would be the negative 7 and the 4. Negative 7 times 4 is negative 28. Negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3. So use those two numbers to break up the middle term. 2x squared minus 7x plus 4x minus 14. And now factor that by grouping. We can pull out an x here, so x times 2x minus 7. We can pull out a 2 here, so 2 times 2x minus 7. And now we can pull out the 2x minus 7, so it's x plus 2 times 2x minus 7. Or if you wrote it as 2x minus 7 in front times x plus 2 after, that would be the same thing. Next example, 2n squared minus 13n plus 21. So what do we do if we're using this AC method? We're multiplying the a times the c. So 2 times 21 is 42. Now what do we do with that? We look for numbers that multiply up to 42 and add up to negative 13. So think of all the ways you can multiply numbers together and get 42, and figure out of all those possibilities what adds up to negative 13. And that would be a negative 7 and a negative 6. So use that to break up the middle term. So it's 2n squared minus 7n minus 6n plus 21. And now factor that by grouping. From these first two terms, we can pull out what they have in common is n. And then what these have in common is a 3. And since there's a minus here, let's pull out minus 3 times 2n. And we need a minus 3 times a minus 7 to get plus 21. Now these have a 2n minus 7 in common. We can pull that out. And our final answer is n minus 3 times 2n minus 7. Okay, one last example. Now here, before we do anything else, do you notice that there is a common factor? All three of these terms have something in common, and we want to start by factoring that out. What's the greatest common factor? 5. These are all 5 times something else. So we can pull out the 5 and put the something else's inside the parentheses. 5 times 2x squared plus 9x plus 7. Now, let's see if we can factor the 2x squared plus 9x plus 7. And to do that, you can use either one of the methods we talked about. You can use the kind of trial and error, figure it out method from the last section, or you can use the AC grouping method from this section. However you do it, you should come up with 2x plus 7 times x plus 1. 2x times x to get 2x squared. The 2x times the plus 1 on the outside is plus 2x. The 7 times the x on the inside is 7x, and those combine to give you 9x. And then we got the 7 times the 1 is the 7 on the end. So there's our final answer, 5 times 2x plus 7 times x plus 1.